ahead and get started. In the interest of time, I want to say hello and welcome. My name is Jeannie Sager, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute. And here at WPI, we conduct, curate, and disseminate research that grows women's philanthropy. And again, I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to join us for this very timely conversation. Our latest report from the Women's Philanthropy Institute looks at how giving changed during the early months of the pandemic. And the findings illustrate the new and expansive ways that people are supporting their communities during COVID, and also highlight gender differences. And so we are very excited to have leaders from Charity Navigator, Postmates, and Facebook with us today to hear more about what innovative generosity looks like during a pandemic through their lens and experiences. But before we jump into our discussion, I want to share the key findings from the report. And I encourage you to visit our website to download the report, the full report, and to view the infographic. Also, I want to remind everyone to please feel free to enter your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation and throughout the conversation. And we hope to get to as many of those questions as possible here at the end. We did reserve some time for Q&A. So let's just dive into the report real quickly. So the spring of 2020 was marked by disruptions to society on a level many Americans had never experienced. COVID-19 had a devastating human toll, infecting more than 1.7 million individuals and resulting in more than 100,000 deaths in the United States just through May 2020. This public health crisis necessitated widespread community shutdowns and social distancing, upending virtually all aspects of American life. Record high unemployment rates, coupled with the fall of financial markets, caused a sudden, severe economic downturn in the United States and across the globe. And as a result, scores of Americans struggled to make ends meet. Nonprofit organizations providing food and other basic needs experienced a dramatic influx of households seeking assistance, many of whom had never previously required their services. So these circumstances combined to create an unprecedented environment for charitable giving during the initial months of the pandemic in the United States. While many of these conditions are still present due to the ongoing nature of this public and global health crisis, along with the associated economic downturn, this report offers a snapshot of how U.S. households initially responded to the COVID-19 pandemic through philanthropy. Beyond examining whether and how much households contributed, the researchers sought to explore the types of philanthropy in which they participated and how their charitable giving changed. The study also aimed to pinpoint the effect of specific elements of the crisis on households' giving. And finally, the researchers sought to provide a more nuanced picture of philanthropic responses to the pandemic by highlighting differences across household types, with a particular focus on gender and marital status. So during the initial months of the pandemic, 56%, so more than half of the majority of the US households engaged in charitable activity in response to this crisis. And I want to emphasize that this study centers on household giving by the general population, which is distinct from other studies you may have seen, which have tended to focus on donors, high net worth households, individuals from a particular demographic group, or corporate and foundation giving. So let's dive into the first finding, which is that nearly 1/3 of US households gave directly to charitable organizations, individuals, or businesses. So direct giving here is defined as contributing money or in-kind goods. And in this study, it extends beyond what we call formal giving, to include monetary or in-kind contributions, not only to charitable organizations, but also to individuals or businesses through, for example, crowdfunding sites or other campaigns. To note, this figure is slightly higher than, but generally comparable to, the percentage of households who gave and the average amount given for disaster aid in 2018. The second finding looks at indirect giving. So almost half, 48%, gave indirectly, particularly those from younger generations. So for example, indirect giving would be ordering takeout from a local restaurant to help out that restaurant and their employees, or paying your stylist without receiving any services. And I know that everyone probably on this call has a real connection to this idea of indirect giving during this unique time. So as a definition, we want to let you know that indirect giving is defined as giving to individuals or businesses in unique ways that arose from conditions present during the initial months of the pandemic. And this finding is consistent with recent research demonstrating that individuals, including younger and more diverse donors, tend to conceptualize philanthropy in broad terms and engage in charitable activities beyond giving money. Our next finding looks at and says that the majority of households maintained their giving levels during the early months of the pandemic, but more households decreased rather than increased their giving as a result of the crisis. So this finding closely aligns with changes in giving that we have seen during past economic recessions. Households were more likely to decrease rather than increase their giving as a result of conditions present during the early months of the pandemic, such as the uncertainty of the spread of the virus, along with further economic impacts. So similar to our previous finding, this is consistent with prior research that demonstrates how uncertainty can be difficult for philanthropy. And our last finding finds that single women were more likely to report decreasing their giving in response to specific elements of the pandemic during this time, including reduced interactions with the community. So this finding runs counter to previous WPI research, which has shown that women are typically more likely to give than men. However, it appears that the circumstances of this particular crisis have disproportionately impacted women economically and disrupted their ability to network and connect. And this may be putting a strain on women's giving in particular. So just some closing thoughts before we head into what I know will be an engaging discussion. The distinct feature of the dual crises of a global pandemic and accompanying economic downturn defy comparison with previous events. This study provides new insight on how U.S. households responded philanthropically, again, during this unique environment. The findings serve as a starting point for understanding changes in individual giving in response to the COVID-19 pandemic as it continues to unfold. They can also help nonprofit and development practitioners and donors adjust their individual fundraising and giving strategies as the current crisis continues. Can also inform their approaches to future crises. And although this report emphasizes changes in U.S. households' charitable giving during the initial months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the fact that the majority of households maintained their giving during this time can be viewed as a positive sign for philanthropy. And this suggests that charitable giving is an ingrained habit for many households that will endure regardless of their personal situation. So with that quick overview, let's welcome our esteemed panelists today. Stacy Steele is Director of Marketing and Communications for Charity Navigator. Vikrum Aiyer is Vice President of Global Public Policy and Strategic Communications at Postmates. And Naomi Gleit, Vice President of Product and Social Impact at Facebook. Each of you have distinguished yourselves in your varied and diverse careers and bring a really unique a perspective on how individuals are leading with generosity during this pandemic in new and expansive ways. So again, a reminder to our guests today, to who are joining us for the discussion, to feel free to enter your questions in chat or Q&A, and we can get to those at the end. But let's go ahead and jump into our conversation and hear your stories. Stacy, Vikram, and Naomi, thank you again. Let's start with Stacy. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
So our report suggests that generosity was alive and well during the early months of the pandemic. How does that align with what you've seen at Charity Navigator?
You know, it has been quite bittersweet. We don't want to be excited in the sense that we're not paying attention to just the sensitivity of actually what's happening. So I'm prefacing my statement, my following statement with that. But for those who are not familiar with Charity Navigator, we're the largest evaluator of nonprofits across the nation. And there are about 1.6 million nonprofits. And in the early months of the pandemic, I would say if we're looking at through March through May, through our website, and our website is not just a website where we have a ratings platform, but it is also a giving platform. We have a feature called the Giving Basket, and on the Giving Basket, donors can go on and actually make donations to one or multiple organizations. And in the first 3 months, over $4 million was donated to nonprofits through our Giving Basket. And I think it's important to note that regarding COVID specifically, over half of that went to charities on our COVID-19 hot topic. And our hot topics are, is centered around calendared events, like holidays, whether they're nationally or internationally recognized, or crises. So the COVID-19 hot topic is a crisis. And so half of that, over $4 million, went directly to those nonprofits that are on that list.
Thank you, Stacy, for that information and that data. Vikram, I'm going to throw this over to you in a slightly a different aspect of this report, because the report also showed that philanthropy is getting increasingly creative. How has your approach to philanthropy as a company changed during COVID? How has Postmates gotten creative in how you give? And maybe share a little bit about Postmates with our audience today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that we root our thinking about the creativity of the moment is basically rooted in the superpower of the product itself. The product is an app-based delivery service. So you can get meals delivered, you can get items from pharmacies delivered, you can get birth control delivered. We tend to process about 2 to 3 million deliveries per month in every state. So we have a pretty high volume in terms of the types of goods that we're distributing around cities. But the easiest way to think about Postmates is actually as the inverse of an Amazon-like model. We all use Amazon, it's hyper convenient. But sometimes instead of building a warehouse outside of a city and then funneling goods into town, we sort of think about it as treating the entire city as a warehouse, indexing the product offerings of what's sold at a local hardware store, at a local bakery, at a local bookstore or taqueria, and then plugging into those storefronts the tools they need, warehouse-like tools, to distribute their goods as if they were a warehouse. In our case, that happens to be a network of about 300,000 couriers. You can think of them somewhat like a Lyft driver or a DoorDash driver that's picking up goods and bringing them directly to your doorstep. So a delivery service, and it's on demand, so you get those deliveries fulfilled usually within 45 minutes or an hour. And there's no doubt that during this time, the sense of on-demand delivery, of app-based delivery has sort of leapfrogged a few years into the future in terms of the ubiquitousness of how it's used. We were actually declared by the Department of Homeland Security and nearly all 50 states as an essential service during this time, both to make sure that if you're a homebound senior, if you're a student who relies on low-income meals, or if you're seeking shelter at a homeless facility, or you're just a parent that's managing kids who are actually doing school from home and a day job, that those goods can actually come to you without, in a non-contact way, without going out into the world. And it ended up being an incredible lifeline for businesses who are looking increasingly to delivery to be able to sell their goods. We had everything from farmers market vendors that obviously don't have a traditional storefront onboarding in DC to sell on the platform. And we had everything to more and more pharmacies. We onboarded about 7,000 new pharmacies at the beginning of COVID just to make sure we were circulating commerce and connecting people to different goods. But the way I think about it is somewhat to what Stacy said in the beginning, which is, while the philanthropic numbers I'm about to share are pretty eye-opening and inspiring, they're rooted in a deep sense and commitment to the way people are using our product right now and the seriousness that we need to take about that, the fact that we as a company need to take that seriously. And I mean that in the following way. There have been 50 million jobless claims in this country, 5.5 million Americans without healthcare, and Postmates has actually seen an 84% increase in the number of workers who sign up to be gig workers or couriers on our app. Similarly, we've seen a 200% increase in the number of small businesses that never did delivery before and now are using it as a lifeline. So when you have people that are joining the app to either earn money making deliveries because of high unemployment rates in America, or you have more and more businesses that traditionally never touched app-based delivery technologies, but now need to as a means of survival, that means we have to take our role and responsibility pretty seriously. And once upon a time, we may have just been used as a burrito delivery app if you're hungover on a Sunday afternoon, but now we need to see ourselves as an essential lifeline and, of powering commerce within communities. And we see those numbers in terms of your point earlier in the reports overview of what this kind of creative giving is looking like. First, this notion of buying local, being able to support local restaurants in our everyday lives is the core of what the superpower of our product is. Again, thinking about that Amazon as the warehouse versus the city of the warehouse framework. But we've actually seen about a 400% increase in buying from local establishments, independent businesses, non-chains or non-enterprise types of restaurants and businesses around the country. We've also seen from that more recently, not on with COVID specifically, but on the other side of the George Floyd moment, us using the Postmates app to particularly highlight Black-owned businesses and brown-owned businesses that admittedly, even as a Postmates app, have traditionally been overlooked, either because you have bigger chains and brands that end up kind of bubbling up to the top of our algorithm, or because people are just more familiar with those brands. But we've actually seen a 8x increase in sales from specifically those businesses that are in distressed neighborhoods or happen to be Black or brown owned businesses in those neighborhoods. And that's, I think, a creative type of giving on two fronts. Number one, you're showing that you want to provide support in your community by not necessarily ordering from just the CVS or just the Amazon to get your items. You want to buy local. But number two, that you can build on that to sort of meet a national moment to be able to ensure that businesses, large and small, owned by women-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, brown-owned businesses are also part of your thinking when you think about using apps like this. And I'll just end by saying this. We have a network of gig workers, about 300,000 of them, that are making these deliveries every day. I mentioned a lot of them are looking to us as an alternative means of employment at a time where unemployment is just all too damn high. What we've also heard from them is that they want a means to be able to give back to their community. They're seeing the restaurants that are struggling. They're noticing the Boys and Girls Club, the daycare center, the community organizations that are troubled in their communities that may not have the brand name visibility of an ACLU or an NAACP or certain types of charities that tend to bubble up to top of mind of what it means to do community giving. So today, we're actually announcing a new program in which that network of 300,000 gig workers can identify local-based community organizations that they are seeing when they're out there doing deliveries, and Postmates will then funnel resources specifically to those communities based off of that worker input and feedback. So from supporting local businesses to supporting minority and ethnically diverse businesses, to also ensuring that gig workers who are working on our platform to survive right now have a voice in that giving, are sort of three general ways that we've sort of adapted our particular superpower to fit the moment of COVID.
Wow, very interesting. You know, and it touches so many new vocabulary words that have kind of come up during this pandemic. The idea of an essential worker, the idea of really being community centric in a way that was so much more different than pre-pandemic, when we were so in tune with the global, the global piece, and having made that shift. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. Very fascinating. I want to turn to Naomi real quick and kind of still build on this, as I see Postmates as providing new tools and new opportunities. So thinking about Facebook, Naomi, how has your approach to building tools at Facebook been shaped by enabling people to give, particularly in times of crisis like COVID, similar to the way Vikrum was discussing how changes have been made at Postmates?
Totally. And Vikrum, I completely agree with your philosophy that the product is your superpower. We believe that at Facebook too. The Facebook product is our superpower. And I would just add, the community is our inspiration. So we're really seeing how the community is using our Facebook product. I lead the social impact team here at Facebook, and this is actually the 5th year anniversary of social impact at Facebook. Social impact is all about building tools, like Vikram mentioned at Postmates, and these tools are meant to empower people to do more good on our platform. They have been shaped by seeing what people are already doing. For example, our giving tools, our fundraising tools, were actually inspired by the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge in 2014. There were so many people trying to donate to the ALS website that the donation form actually crashed. And that was the seed of the idea for the donate button on Facebook. We thought if we could, with one click, allow people to donate directly to nonprofits through Facebook, that would make it even easier. Since then, it's been 5 years. The community has raised over $3 billion for nonprofits and personal causes. $1 billion of these have come from birthday fundraisers, which is a new cultural behavior of donating your birthday to a personal cause that you care about. And to the point about what we're seeing with COVID, like you guys mentioned in your report, we are seeing a lot of giving to COVID. There's been over $100 million raised for COVID-related fundraisers globally this year on Facebook. But the really amazing part is that more than half of these donations were under $25. So that's really surprising. Every little bit counts and it all adds up. To the point about racial justice, we've also seen $50 million in funds raised towards causes for racial justice. And so we are seeing giving continue on our platform, as well as what you guys are seeing on yours.
Thanks, Naomi. And it is, to note this, we keep talking about the time of the report being a unique moment in time, but the survey ended in May. That was conducted in May. And then all of these things have happened since then. And so the idea of what will giving in 2020 look like, as a whole picture, once we factor in the social, justice reckoning of this summer, along with the wildfires and environmental disasters that our country is facing right now, along with it being an election year. I mean, 2020 altogether will be unprecedented and quite a moment in history. So Naomi, I want to ask you a question about kind of women in particular, especially because there's such a large audience for you at Facebook, a user. Our studies show that women in particular are motivated to give when they feel connected and through volunteer opportunities. And of course, our social distance reality has made that difficult. How have you seen people use technology to step up and support their communities during this time?
So I think this is a great question about stepping up and supporting your community, because during a crisis, oftentimes the people that are in the best position to help you and help each other are the people that are closest physically to you. So that is your community. Those are your neighbors. Those are your local businesses. Those are your local nonprofits. And we actually have a feature called Community Help, which is a destination where you can go to ask for and offer help in your community. Vikram talked about the trend that you're seeing in terms of buying local. So we are also seeing that. We're seeing people buying gift cards for their favorite local businesses because these businesses are really struggling right now and they need the money up front. We are seeing people use community help to offer to do grocery runs for elderly neighbors. And we're also seeing really creative, unexpected uses where people are students at culinary school and they can't go to school, but they're cooking meals for people that need them. So all kinds of giving in many different forms we're seeing on our platform right now.
So great to hear, and speaks to our research that really shows, again, this desire and alignment with a broader definition of philanthropy beyond just giving money. Stacy, people have clearly been generous during this crisis, and at the same time, this has been a difficult period for nonprofits when it comes to fundraising. How can nonprofits best tap into this generosity, raise money, and engage donors despite everything that's going on? Would love to hear from you, Stacy, on kind of general best practices or tips for nonprofits on what you have seen at Charity Navigator that may help motivate people to give.
I think it's very, very important to know that people want to hear from those in their communities. They want to hear from the nonprofits that serve their communities. They are willing, like we've all said, to give. It's important to put your name and your organization's face out there. I know I can see this on our own platform. We too, Charity Navigator, we are a nonprofit ourselves. And I can tell you that in just looking, through our social media platforms, how much more engaged nonprofits have been on their own social media platforms. For some nonprofits, they have maybe 1 or 2 social media platforms that they have access to. For others, they have a slew of them. But I would say leveraging social media is important. I also would suggest that, go back to the tried and true things that, nonprofits started with, at the very beginning. If you are not physically out into the community or can't be for whatever reason, there's email. There is nothing stopping you from engaging through newsletters, keeping your constituents up to date on what you're doing, what your plans are, reinforcing your mission. Charity Navigator's mission is to make impactful philanthropy easier for all. And we make sure that whatever we're trying to do, even on our social media or even sharing with those who are connected with us through our emails, know that they can come to us or use us as a vehicle for that mission. And so just to give you a quick example, on our social media pages, we have been highlighting nonprofits. Now, again, we are a nonprofit ourselves. And so we understand that in order for us to survive and thrive, there's a financial component to that. And we've been highlighting our star-rated nonprofits. So we have 2 rating systems with Charity Navigator. The star rating system is what many people are familiar with. And typically for star-rated charities, think of the very large charities that you can think of that are 501c3 designated by the IRS. And typically for us and rating these nonprofits, they have to electronically submit to the IRS what is called a Form 990. And for us, for our star rated charities to be evaluated, they need to have 7 consecutive years of electronic information that they've sent to the IRS. Our second rating system is our Encompass rating system. That's very new. That was launched at the end of July, on July 29th to be exact. And that's typically for smaller nonprofits. And we launched that specifically because we realized that there was a huge gap that was not being met out there, where there are some great smaller nonprofits that are doing phenomenal work in communities. And so they, like our star ratings, they too need to be evaluated. But for them, it's at least 3 consecutive years of filings with the IRS, again, of their full form 990s. And what we've been doing on our social media is we've been highlighting various star rated and Encompass rated charities so that people can be more aware of what's out there. Everybody knows about the large ones, but not everybody knows about the smaller ones. And when I talk about the smaller ones, I'm talking not just about those that may be local or regional. I'm also talking about smaller charities that are actually doing work internationally. So I would say it's really important for the nonprofits to make sure that they're listening to their constituents, that they're sharing information, not only openly on their website. So having a really thriving website is very important now. Because people are jumping on and they want to see what you're doing, but also engaging with donors or potential donors on your social media pages and through the traditional sources like your email, sending out those newsletters. They're important too.
Low tech phone call. We've been hearing from lots of
Yes.
our practitioners.
Absolutely. Emails, phone calls. They're very important.
Yeah. And that lines up with the idea of, again, remaining connected, and also lines up a little bit with how this focus on local and that smaller community. We've seen in particular giving circles being able to be so much more flexible and responsive during this pandemic because they are closest to those community providers and understanding what's needed. Vikram, sort of a similar question to you with regards to being generous during this crisis, but maybe thinking about what a nonprofit could potentially learn from the corporate side, both in terms of thinking creatively about engaging audiences and then also potentially corporate partnership activations. What you just shared earlier with sourcing out to your 300,000 gig operators to kind of be your boots on the ground to see what's actually being needed in the community. Share a little bit more with our audience.
Yeah, I think as someone that comes from government in the past, this might sound a little hokey or obvious, but we're starting to think about the types of proactive campaigns that at least our team gets to work on a bit more like a campaign, a traditional maybe political campaign. And I mean that in 2 ways. One, in terms of exactly what Stacy spoke to and what Naomi spoke to in terms of regional organizations. And then second, in terms of advocacy. And I know there's a bright line between the two of advocacy and philanthropy, but I want to start there really quickly because I know Megan also put this type of question in the chat in terms of how can you partner with organizations to know that it reflects the values of the corporation. And I think there are a lot of times where we've noticed over the last 6 or 7 months where there's a constituency that's hurting. Whether that's wage stagnation that's been exacerbated and communities that get impacted by that, whether that's individuals that are, struggling to pay rent, given that there's huge job loss in this country, or even if it's just access to capital or reproductive rights and what's on stake in this upcoming election. And I mentioned some of this because when we think about, for example, on the Postmates side, restaurants, and supporting local businesses and buying local, we also know that regulatorily, there have been a lot of restrictions on when and how restaurants can open. Some restaurants can't have any in-room dining right now, whereas other restaurants in, say, New Jersey are open to a certain capacity. New York City just opened to 25% capacity. And yet, flights are happening daily around the world, and they're not really being cited as a super spreader event. Now, I don't mean to question the science of what's going on with COVID in terms of proximity. There's a validity to not wanting to be clustered in a closed space. But it means that sometimes our restaurant partners will reach out to us and say, hey, we're petitioning the city for a slower reopening or this type of reopening or accelerating the pace of that. Is that something that you can help us advocate on behalf of? And that changes the veneer of philanthropy from just pure giving to also being a community organizer on behalf of that interest or need, particularly if it lines up with your organization. Similarly, we have noticed that 60% of our user base right now are female, and we have thousands of women-owned businesses on the platform. And so when we think about philanthropy, we sometimes think about giving to organizations that are advocating for more equity across genders in the workplace. Paid Family Leave USA Plus is an organization that has really tried to advocate in front of Congress in terms of harmonizing paid leave laws and expanding them and protecting them. The ACLU and other organizations have been very vocal about criminalizing reproductive rights in certain parts of this country. Now, I know some of these topics can get dicey or divisive quickly, but I think to answer your question about what nonprofits can do and advocate for from corporations is, yes, sometimes you can ask for money. And that's important. Many times you can ask for volunteer hours and boots on the grounds within those communities. But a third thing that we've really seen emerge is people want advocates. People want to be able to bring the bully pulpit of an organization that might have a lot of eyeballs on your app or your technology, or you just have a unique kind of megaphone that you can use. And if you can bring that to bear in an organization, get other CEOs to sign a common document calling for certain change, or taking out ads in newspapers calling for certain reforms, or just standing up with other community organizations when they're going toe-to-toe for a fight that doesn't often involve cutting a check, I think that can also really be a really important bend to all of this. And that's a unique form of philanthropy, because I think during this time of racial inequity and COVID inequity, we're seeing a lot of civic motivation. And that can be bipartisan and politically agnostic, but it means that people are looking to get fired up, to get involved in ways that don't often give money. And I think that's another way in which nonprofits and corporations can maybe think about tangoing together.
Yeah, and we've seen that in terms of our research here at WPI, the idea that women, again, back to that expansive, broader definition of philanthropy, it really is more than just time, talent, and treasure. That women really lean into testimony and advocacy as part of their philanthropy, as well as ties. So when you think about building those networks, both online and offline, are very important to a woman's identity as a philanthropist. So that's very interesting, and I love the idea of framing it as proactive campaigns. That there is a strategy to all of this. So thank you for that. So I'd love to close this formal part of our conversation with everyone sharing one example of creative philanthropy that you've seen during COVID or particularly resonated for you. I'm going to start with Stacy and then go to Vikrum and then end with Naomi.
So I know that this is probably going to come up with a lot of others. I think one of the most amazing things that I saw personally is the making of masks and PPE, but specifically about masks that were being made from dining tables turned homemade manufacturing outposts for those who are part of the deaf and hard of hearing community. And those are the masks that initially weren't being talked about, but quickly had to be talked about because that community itself requires something different that for those of us who are hearing may not think about. And so that's having the clear screens, which is an important feature for a community that relies on communicating not only with their hands, but through facial expressions. And just to kind of tag on to that, we recently held for our innovation series that we host on Facebook. We do have these Facebook Lives with leaders from the nonprofit community. And one of our recent Facebook Lives featured the Deaf Hearing Communication Center, a wonderful organization out of Philadelphia. And, you know, we had this conversation about what can people do to advocate for the needs of those who are in the disability community. And that's one example. Making masks that a community desperately needs, that wasn't being talked about at the beginning, but needed to be addressed as the pandemic raged.
Thank you, Stacy. Such a great reminder about making sure everyone's included in how we move forward in this pandemic. So great example. Vikrum?
Yeah, that's pretty eye-opening, and I'm ashamed to admit I didn't even think about it like that, but that's great to hear, Stacy. And I think from our perspective, one of the more interesting things that sort of been brought to mind, and it's a challenging topic, but it's just food insecurity. And, you know, COVID or non-COVID, this is something that many Americans confront, many citizens of the world confront on a daily basis. But it's particularly challenging when you hear that students who traditionally rely on school meals, subsidized meals that are often subsidized by government programs or charitable programs, aren't able to even access those meals. And I can't take credit for this, but we have this incredible team at Postmates that operates this pillar called Postmates Civic Labs that's actually used our system to be able to route leftover food to students who rely on those meals, to homeless shelters that might be under supply of food, and to nurses and frontline healthcare workers. And we start to think about food insecurity, both from a product perspective and maybe being able, as Naomi and I were saying, to use our product to connect the dots between those who are hungry and those that might have excess supply of food, and start to thinking about it across vulnerable populations. It really forces and nudges the organization or the business to rethink what its core priorities are on a day-to-day basis. And to Stacy's point, when you think about making change, there are unique examples about how that change goes down. And then there are the unique examples of how an organization trying to bring about that change is different on the other side of it in terms of what their incentives are and how they behave going forward. So I feel like a bright silver lining is that food security being prioritized by a private profit-driven company is a pretty good outcome, and something that all of us at the company will ensure we all keep ourselves committed to moving forward.
That's fantastic. I love the creativity around that too. And really, again, leveraging and leaning into what you do best and your strengths and maximizing that. That's just terrific. So Naomi, how about you?
So just following up on one thing Stacy said, you were encouraging nonprofits to use social media in addition to traditional channels like email and phone. I just wanted to point out we are offering a lot of education webinars to help nonprofits strengthen their digital strategy. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the comments around specifics about how the tools work. Stacy, you mentioned Charity Navigator is using Facebook Live as it's becoming harder and harder to have events in person. A lot of people are moving their events online, digital, using Facebook and Instagram Live. We just launched new fundraiser integrations with both of those products. So definitely check out the webinars. And we do have a Ads for Impact capacity building program that gives nonprofits $10,000 free in ads credits that they can use. And we support you in building your ads campaigns. One of my favorite examples of what I've seen happen so far in the platform comes from my amazing executive assistant. I am going to show you her 6-year-old daughter, Andy, is amazing. And she loves the Oakland Zoo. So I'm just going to project this. I don't know if you guys can see it. Just one second. Sorry. There we go. There's Andy. Can you guys see her? Yeah, she often goes to Oakland Zoo on the weekend. She was very upset to hear that they were struggling to make ends meet and might be permanently closing. She got $5 from the tooth fairy when she lost a tooth, and she decided to start a fundraiser to save the Oakland Zoo. It started with $5. She was making these bracelets. There's Andy, for anyone that donated $25 or more. And just so you guys know, it ended up raising over $225,000 from over 4,000 donors. You can see the stats here, and she literally saved the Oakland Zoo. So the zoo and the zookeepers and the animals are all.
Show up at all. Well, right now we're scheduled to drywall next Tuesday. We thought it'd be a month ago.
Wow.
And that's
That's fantastic. A question actually has come through specifically about Facebook fundraisers for you, Naomi. Can you share what the long-term changes brought on by COVID do you think will be there to stay post-pandemic in terms of nonprofit fundraising on Facebook or otherwise, or in corporate philanthropy?
Sure. So I think with COVID, we've introduced a lot of features that were on our roadmap, but may not have been the highest priority, but they became accelerated because of COVID. A great example is what I mentioned around Facebook and Instagram Live. We saw nonprofits asking for fundraiser tools that would work as they took their events online. So we're used to having galas in person. We need to have Livestream Galas now. And so we've launched a lot of new features around these live events. The other thing that we've done is launched on new platforms. So we have expanded our tools to work not just on Facebook, but on Instagram, Messenger, and hopefully in the future, WhatsApp as well.
Stacy or Vikram, do you have anything to say about kind of enduring changes that might happen in terms of fundraising and generosity during the remainder of this pandemic?
I just need this space and this time. And so she's actually talking to a lot of people doing a lot of interviews.
Yeah, we're hearing somebody. If we could make sure everybody's on mute.
Good. I just heard another, I'm like, listening to all these podcasts. I just heard, I don't even know if it's a podcast or was, but I came across something and it was just.
Stacy, maybe take a shot at that. I think maybe we fixed our mute problem.
Okay. All right. If you can ask the question again, I got a bit distracted by the.
Yes. Just the idea of what do you have any predictions of what might be some enduring changes that are going to happen kind of as a result of what we have learned in this early moment in this pandemic that will kind of stay with us in terms of philanthropy and generosity moving forward?
I think it's, engagement is something that I think because of the need to adapt in many instances and change for nonprofits, this push, whether it was just as a result of this pandemic or they were already thinking about it in the past, but I think this push for really pointed engagement with their constituents will continue. I mean, I want to actually kind of come back to something that I had started with at the very beginning. Obviously, it shared, the dollar amounts and some, some really sexy numbers out there about giving. But again, there's a seriousness behind all of this. And I did notice there were questions coming in on the chat, particularly, I think, a question came in from Kim and from Gasby and from Randy regarding how we actually deal with things, we see things here at Charity Navigator. So, I mentioned before that between March and May.
Yeah, I was asked to be on this board of directors.
Stacy, can you unmute yourself one more time? We're still dealing with some muting issues.
Here we go. Can everyone hear me?
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Figure out the strategic vision for this organization. And I'm like, what am I doing on this? No. I actually,
I'm so sorry, Stacy.
Can we try again?
Let's try again, Stacy.
Okay, so just really quickly, so to date, over $9.4 million. So from March to September, so where we are now, over $9 million have come through our giving basket. Of that, over 900,000 have come through this month alone. That's if we're kind of talking about percentages, that's 126% year over year from the same time last year increase.
Wow.
And in terms of our COVID charities, and I know there was a question asking about how do nonprofits get to be placed on our hot topic list? First of all, they have to be star rated. So if they're star rated, they can be evaluated and they can be included on our hot topic list. And again, it depends on the cause area. You know, our donations were up 476%. So I'm just talking about donations, the actual number of donations. In terms of the dollar amount for COVID charities, that was up 564%. So if nothing else, not only is if we can think, you know, what do we envision, you know, going forward, I think giving will continue to be, to happen. I think people by their nature want to give and they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And, you know, we've even kind of, you know, to the extent that we can kind of glean information from Google Analytics, you know, we see that, you know, women and men are just about the same in their giving with women just slightly above the men. So in terms of our COVID hot topic, again, from March to the present, 56% of giving came from women with 44% from men.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think kind of 3 quick changes we're already seeing, but we'll continue to see is one, I think employees of private organizations or think tanks or charities or nonprofits, employees and staff are going to expect more from the organization in terms of who they partner with and the stances that they take. We've certainly seen that inside our own business and other businesses in terms of rising to a moment and asking what actions, what advocacy, or what stances we might take. And I think while you get that kind of bottom-up nudge inside a building, you're going to get more, the antennas of these private corporations and companies are going to be a little bit more up and attuned to where are there ways that we can actually put our money where our mouth is, put our advocacy where our mouth is, and lean out into the core issue areas or values that company holds up. And that means the second change is for nonprofits are really going to be able to approach companies of all sizes and make their case, particularly smaller nonprofits that both Stacy and Naomi spoke to that are hyper local, whether that's the Oakland Zoo or whether that's the Crenshaw Chamber of Commerce in Southern California. Not that it's always a business association or a kind of a recreational association, but these organizations that you typically wouldn't assume a multi-billion-dollar corporation to be able to say like, oh, we're actually going to give to them. I think you're going to be able to see more and more companies willing to do that, given the moment is a lot more regional, it's more community focused, it's about looking out for one another. So to the nonprofits of the world, I would say, step up the ask, make sure to accelerate that and hold companies' feet to the fire as to why their investment hyper locally actually makes a difference, particularly for companies like Postmates, where our entire product is about a hyper local tool, a community tool. And then the third and final change is something that Naomi said, which is again about what's happening inside private companies. You know, a technology company like ours, we've got so many ideas of how we can up-level our social good. But there's also business goals that the engineers and the product teams are working on day to day, and they need to put stuff on what they call their product roadmap, right? Which Naomi pointed out. I think we're going to need to see, and we're already seeing, more advocates inside these companies pushing for different items to get on those product roadmaps and having kind of a level of cover these days than they maybe didn't in the past, because everyone around them can see that the world is changing and the company demands and employees are demanding to meet that moment. So, you know, employee demands, nonprofits getting more bullish on asking about local engagement, and internal advocates at these companies getting more bullish about engineering engagement, I think might be 3 trends that are positive outcomes of the moment we're seeing.
Naomi, you were nodding your head a lot. Do you want to add a little bit more to what Vikram just shared?
I mean, Vikram, I couldn't agree more. As you said, we are seeing a lot of ideas coming from throughout the company for what we can do to improve and accelerate our roadmap on social impact. The one thing I did want to point out for everyone on this call, though, is that we have Giving Tuesday coming up on December 1st. Giving Tuesday is always a big fundraising day. Earlier this year on May 5th, we had Giving Tuesday Now in honor of the COVID crisis. It was a day to welcome giving in all forms. Coming up on December 1st, this is really focused on financial fundraising. Facebook is matching $7 million. And so I'm really excited about what we can do together on Giving Tuesday.
Wow. Thank you for that push. And it's a great reminder of, for those of you who have not seen our WPI's Women Give report for this year, 2020, is about the intersection of technology, gender, and giving. And so very timely and resonates at this moment in time when we have moved to a virtual platform in almost every aspect of our life, philanthropy no different. So thank you, Naomi, and Giving Tuesday was a partner of ours in that report, and speaks to just one of the different ways that women like to give. And so I want to thank the 3 of you again, Stacy, Vikram, and Naomi, for joining us for this conversation. I know that we may not have gotten to all the questions, but we'll make sure that we try and curate them and get those questions to each of the panelists and get an answer to each of you who joined us today. And so I just want to say that some of the themes that kind of came through our conversation really, emphasized again this broader definition of philanthropy, and being able to lean into our generosity in whatever way we can. It resonates for all of us, and that the importance of engagement through this time, and investing in your own community is going to be an enduring change that comes through this pandemic. And then for all of you, the 3 of you who are truly superheroes in this, encouraging all of you who are joining us today for the call to lean into your superpower, and know that you are doing great work and good work, and stay safe, stay well, stay healthy, and we will all get through this together. So again, thank you so much, Stacy, Vikram, and Naomi, for joining us, and I look forward to future conversations. Thank you all.